Okay, so now we're going to work on building up your solder. You've gone ahead and you've tinned all of your pieces on just the sides or just the edges of all four sides. And now what you're going to end up doing is going back and tinning the face, the front and the back, where your tape connects to your piece. And watching the video and be real careful with it because you don't want to add more flux if you can avoid it. And you want to make sure that you do exactly what you did the first time around, which is just swipe it on really quickly and move on, especially on the front and back. You're going to have, if you spend too much time, you're going to have some trouble with the tape coming up. So this really needs to be a very quick and easy swipe. Then what you're going to do is go back and you're going to start building up those edges. So you're going to pick up small bits of solder and add it to the sides only, not the front or the back, just the sides. And again, you'll see it in the video. Add flux if you need to. And the way you'll know if you need more flux is if your solder is not flowing or if your iron is kind of being jerky and not moving smoothly. You want to make sure that you're always checking for any copper tape showing or any black tape showing. And if the black tape is showing, then you're going to want to try and figure out how to fix that. And if the copper tape is showing, go over that spot with your iron again. You want to make sure that you do not overheat or overwork a piece. So this is why we do a piece and then put it down and go to the next one. Because again, if you overheat, that's when you're going to have struggles with your tape starting to pull up. And then what you're going to see me do is you're going to see me go back a third time to build up the solder. I don't do it all at one time on every side. I tin and then I build up and then I put down and then I build it up again. And hopefully the third time is the charm. Some troubleshooting. If your solder's not moving or flowing, or if you're getting little peaks in your solder when you pull your iron up, you need to add flux. If your solder's not sticking to your iron when you try to pick some up, you need to clean your iron. Your tip needs to be sparkly, shiny, clean. If your copper tape is starting to lift around the edges, put it down and work on another piece because whatever you're working on is probably too hot. You can then go back with your burnishing stick and push all of that tape down once it's cooled off and make sure that you're not getting any flux underneath that tape because it won't stick if it does. All right, so take a look at the video, building up solder, and I'll see you back in a little bit. All right, so hopefully you have gone through and you've tinned all your pieces. And if you look at mine, they're cool. So if you look at mine, you can see there's still plenty of copper. I did not go over the edges. If you see solder on the edges, it's because it flowed over, and that's okay. That means that there was flux there, and that's totally fine. But I didn't make an effort to purposefully go and solder those because the face where your tape ends is the weak point in terms of the sticky. It's where, if your tape is going to start to pull up and be a problem, that's where it's going to happen. So I'm trying to give it as little attention to that as possible. I'm trying not to heat it too much because I don't want to have that problem. So once I've tinned all the edges, now I'm going to come back and I'm going to reflux, again, just the sides. I'm going to do another layer of solder on just the sides. Clean my tip. Grab some solder. This time I'm going to be a little bit slower and more careful. And then you'll see it's flowed over that side now even more. And I haven't had to touch my iron over here at all yet. It's just the solder flowing over the edge. And that's exactly what I want to have happen, because in the long run, that's going to save me from having to go back and do a whole bunch of work there. I'll still have to touch up, but a touch up is a lot better than spending 10 minutes with your iron directly on it. Okay. Try again. Should be last side. Okay, and I'm just holding it. The reason I'm holding in place is to make sure that it cools off completely. Okay, so now if you compare these two, this one, oops, this one has only been tinned, whereas this one has the second layer of solder in it. So you can see there, the copper here is showing through, but over here, and again, I didn't come on the front here with my iron, the solder just flowed over the edge because of the flux. And that's what I want to have happen. Now, looking at it, push that out of the way. Again, looking at it, I can see spots where there's copper. And on this side, it's really, really bad. I can come up and touch this up now and not be going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, potentially bringing up the tape. I can just go back now and touch it and fix it. Okay, so flux again. And now I'm just going to go in on this side where I see copper. I'm just going to go back in and touch it so that it flows and fixes, covers up all those little copper spots. And it's going to make your piece look lumpy and weird, and that's okay, because we're going to go back over it again in a minute, and you'll see how that gets fixed. Now I'm going to flip it. Now see, this side didn't get nearly as much. That's okay. I can still fix it. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to come back and do a quick run where I see copper. I'm not going over it back and forth, back and forth. I'm just trying to do it once if I can. If it's not moving, add flux. If your solder's not moving around, add flux. I've heated this enough for right now. It's not done, but I'm going to move it to the side and let it cool off and do another piece so that that has time to cool off before I move on to the next step with it. So same thing here. I'm going to flux the sides again. And then come back through. Go a little bit more slowly and add a little bit more flux, or add a little bit more solder. Let it harden and turn. There we go. Now you are probably wondering, and if you haven't, you're going to at some point wonder how much solder is enough. Well, that's a good question. There's no right answer for that, you guys. Seriously, it is what you want it to look like. So I really like my pieces to be chunky. I like there to be a lot of solder because I want it to look a certain way. I want it to look chunky, and that's a really nice way of having it look vintage too. If you don't want to have that as chunky, then you're going to have to go with lighter layers, and you're probably going to have to heat your piece more often with lighter layers. So you want to do it much slower. You're going to do a little bit and then put it away, and then a little bit and then put it aside. So like on this one, again, the solder didn't flow very well over the edges. And that's okay. I'm going to try and make this one not as chunky as I make my other ones so that you can see the difference. So again, I'm just going to come in. I'm just going to put it down because I don't need to hold it to do this. And I'm going to do coat 1, 2. Probably need a little bit more solder at this point. 3, 4. I'm not going to do the other side right now because I've already heated it up quite a bit by doing what I just did. So I'm going to put it down over on my towel and move on to the next piece and come back to it later. To build up your solder then, like on this piece, now I've done the whole thing, right? I did both sides, I did all the edges, but the edges or the front and back pieces here are really lumpy. And I can see that in the camera. You can see what I mean when I say lumpy. It's not flat and pretty. So now what I'm going to do is add some more solder. I'm not going back here. I'm going back to the sides. And again, more flux. And I'm going to repeat exactly what I've been doing. I'm only going to go on the sides because again, if I've done it correctly, my solder should flow over the sides. If you're not seeing that, you need to add flex. So I'm not adding a ton more, I'm just adding a little bit more. And what you're going to notice is at this point, watch when I come up, I'm going to put my solder on, and then when I'm done, I pull up from the center. And that way I don't get bumps on the edges of extra solder. It has a tendency to just lay really flat. That's because solder flows like water. Hot solder flows like water, or like mercury. If you ever played with mercury when you were a kid, it flows in the direction that it's pointed. So I'm going to add another layer here, back and forth, pull up in the center. Let it cool for a second, turn it, add my solder, back and forth. Oh, it's moving back and forth, pull up in the center. And I can see that one flowed one direction. I didn't want it to do that, so I had to fix it. And then the last side thing, add my solder, pull up in the center. Let it cool. Okay. So hopefully, I know this is really hard to see on camera because it's even a little hard to see in person, but hopefully you can see now how much chunkier my edges are. If you look at that compared to this one, do you see how much rounder this edge is in this one? That's just because I've added that much more solder. And honestly, that's still really hot. When I turn it over and I look at the back, it's kind of, well, actually this is the front, whatever. It's still bumpy over here. So again, I'm gonna touch it up. But the thing is, the more you mess with the solder, it's always going to end up looking messed up somewhere. So once I fixed it here, now I've got to check top and bottom again to make sure that I didn't mess that up. And that actually looks pretty good. Okay, so this piece is done, at least as far as what I'm going to do right now with the iron. This is ready for a jump ring and for all the next steps. So I'm going to put it aside. And I'm going to do this one now. And now this one I'm going to try not to do as chunky so that you can see the difference, or hopefully you can see the difference. If it doesn't translate well on video, then what I will do is take a couple pictures and post those separately so that you can get a good look. All right, so again, flux. Flux. Oh, and I didn't do this side yet. So I need to do this side. I am never adding flux to the front or back. The reason is I don't want my flux brush getting underneath that tape, because as soon as it does, that tape is going to start to pull up. I need some more solder, so I'm going to unspool some more. And that's how I store my brush, is right inside that hole. It's pretty convenient that way. All right, so now I'm going to go back and I am going to do the front piece here. Again, this is what I do if I don't want it to be as chunky. If I like that chunky look, then I can keep doing edges and I'll get there. But if you want a cleaner look, then you're going to want to do it this way. You're just going to want to take your time. So I'm going to come back with some solder and just go in where that copper is still showing. Okay. Now, I don't have any copper showing anymore on either side. There is some cleanup to do, and I will add a little bit more solder to do that, because if you only have the amount of solder that you used for tinning, it's going to look flat, and you'll see a lot more of the problems with your tape. Like if there's a wrinkle or whatever, you're going to see those. They're going to be a lot more obvious. So, but I am going to let that just sit for a minute so that it's not so warm. And I will come back to one of these guys. And again, flux, flux, fluxity flux. I want to tell you that you never have too much flux, but the fact is that sometimes you do get too much flux on it and they're a real pain to clean. So you got to figure out what your sweet spot is. Some solder. And watch again, back and forth, pull up from the center. Now I'm going to do something so that you can see how to fix it. I'm going to put way too much solder on this side. Okay. You see that giant blob of solder? That is not what I want. The way to get all that extra solder off is to put the piece with the blob on its side and put it down on your block. And then you're just going to run your iron down, reheat it, pull your piece up, leaving your iron down here. And there's that extra blob. And now I don't have all of that extra solder on my piece. However, I did kind of mess this up. So I'm going to fix that really quick. Okay. So still just building it up. Yeah, I need to do this top part. The center. This one's going to need some more because I see a lot of copper still showing. Oh yeah, right there especially. I'm just going to that and like that. See how fast I do that though? I don't spend a lot of time on it because I don't want it to overheat. Now this one's still pretty warm, so I'm not going to come back to this one. This guy, like I said, is ready to go. I just wanted to get a good close look at it. Yeah, all right, so we're happy with that one. Move on to another. And I know this gets kind of repetitive and boring to watch, but it's important to do it the right way the first time. Because if you get into a bad habit, it's hard to get out of that habit. Okay. I'm just going to do this one and then I'll go back to that other one. So let's talk for a moment. You're working, hopefully you're working on your own pieces, or you've watched the video once and you're watching it again to work on your own pieces. And yours is not working out the way mine is. It's just not looking the same. You feel like you're making a mess and you're not very good at this, and you're maybe even getting frustrated or angry. Keep in mind that I've been doing this for well over a decade and you are literally just learning. So give yourself some grace, be patient. This takes a lot of practice to get really good at. And in the meantime, you're still going to make stuff that you like. It just won't be as good as what you make in a year from now. And that's okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to this one. This is the one that I'm trying not to make overly chunky. So how we're going. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I've got all of that copper tape covered. I don't want any copper showing. All right, that's pretty good. I'm not going to add any more solder to this piece. What I'm going to do is even out what's already there. And I've got a bunch of like little bumpies and stuff. So I'm going to come back again. If I need flux, I can add it, but I don't think I'm going to need it. I'm going to put it down because it's a lot easier to do this way. And I'm just going to come in and heat it. And then just like before, I'm going to come up in the middle. See, here's where it gets a little tricky. When you put minimal solder on it, it does like to leave bumps behind. So instead of coming up in the middle, you may have to sweep all the way off the edge so that you don't have a big bump left. Back and forth here again. And again, I'm just going to come off the edge. And I'm going to go back and forth on this side. Come off the edge. And all I'm doing at this point, guys, is evening out what's already there. Now, normally I would say, put this aside, let it cool off again and come back and do the other side. But for time's sake, I'm going to go right back to it. Same thing. I just want to even out the solder. Oops, and I got a bump, so I'm going to have to Not adding any solder, just evening out what's already there, which is being kind of difficult. There we go. The one place where you do want to make sure you have plenty of solder is on top. Because up here, because you're going to set your jump ring in that solder, and you want the solder to flow around the jump ring and not have the jump ring sitting on top of your pendant. You want your jump ring to go into the solder. So that's the only reason why you want to make that top part a little bit heavier with the solder. Okay. That's decent-ish. All right, so go ahead and go through and finish all of your pieces, building up that solder. And then when we come back, I will show you how to add jump rings to all of your pieces.